I found that even after I'd stopped drinking, I was overeating, overworking, creating debt, having multiple relationships. Well, I had to keep all of that going to get away from the feeling of terror that took hold of me whenever I stood still for a minute. Finally, I guess I got to the point where the consequences of my survival techniques were as painful to live with as what I was running from. And I became willing to stop and face whatever it was. I had always felt like I was the one who was out of step, like there was something really wrong with me. Well, as I came out of my denial, I became aware of the emotional as well as the physical incest that I had experienced. With the help of my therapist and the support of the group, I've come to have some compassion for myself and the things I did to survive, and I know that I don't have to run anymore.
In today's session, we're going to talk about recovery from sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is a damaging, humiliating assault on a child's spirit and body. For most victims, it's a secret that they maintain and attempt to repress well into adulthood. While one hopes that the pain will finally leave, it often remains within, severely impacting how it is we live our lives. The consequences for childhood sexual abuse are many. They range from affecting our self-esteem to one's relationships with others, one's developing sexuality, the ability to trust others, the ability to be successful. People who've been sexually abused often learn to medicate their pain through the use of alcohol, other drugs, or food. It's common to see a survivor become a compulsive overeater, bulimic, anorexic, or chemically dependent. Abuse survivors often live a life of much shame and guilt. They experience incredible powerlessness in their lives. They may be depressed, extremely frightened, possibly very angry. We're talking about an emotional damage that extracts an extremely heavy toll. Time alone does not heal those wounds. Today I'll be talking to you about the healing process. The first step vital to the healing process is the willingness to speak the truth. Many childhood sexual abuse survivors have lived in silence for far too long. By not verbalizing one's experiences, people develop a shame that becomes cancerous. The question that's so often posed is, why do I need to talk about it? Do I really need to say it out loud? By talking about what occurred in the past, you now have the opportunity to sort out the past from the present. By not doing so, the past and the present become blurred and distorted. Talking about the past is a healthy way for you to purge the pain, the shame, the anger. By not talking, those many feelings become twisted, they become exaggerated, turned inward or turned outwards toward others. When you haven't found it safe to share your secret fully, you need more energy to control your feelings, your thoughts. Life becomes so consumed in any attempt to control everything just so your feelings don't get tapped. Ellen speaks to this issue well. As a survivor, one of the issues that I had to deal with was my anger toward myself for not ever having spoken up about the abuse when it was occurring. I didn't speak up when it was happening, so I felt wrong to start talking about it 20 years later. Today, I know that in order to survive as a child, I had to walk away from the pain. I had to abandon my feelings the best I could. I didn't know how to express the pain, the shame, the anger that I felt. Today, just saying what occurred and talking about my guilt for having kept it a secret, for keeping silent, has freed me up. It has truly given me back my life. Oh, it's been painful, all right, but it's got me to the other side of the pain. For the first time, I can love myself and see my value. Not talking about what has occurred is a form of minimizing and a form of denying the experience. By never talking about it, you continue to negate and to deny the depth of the experience, and I think you negate and deny yourself in that process. Obviously, life has been very unsafe in many ways, and as you are ready to begin this venture, you need to set yourself up so that you have people in your life with which to share. Working with other survivors, for many, is the most validating of all. It's validating, it's safe, and a positive experience. Other survivors know. They understand. They feel your pain. In addition to receiving support from other survivors, working with a therapist that is skilled in abuse issues, childhood sexual abuse issues, most likely will be necessary at some point in your process. They provide the structure, the framework to assist you to work through the issues. The process of speaking the truth allows you to create emotional healthy boundaries for yourself. And as you talk about the experience, you have the opportunity to become more separate from your past, separate from the abuser, and separate from the internalized shame. People are often afraid that they speak the truth out loud, that it's going to make the reality more painful. When you talk, you will most likely feel some of the pain that's always been there. But now you have a chance to get it outside of yourself. And with support, you will find relief to not be judged. You will be understood and be supported. In talking about the abuse, you can receive validation for your experiences, the validation that wasn't there when you were a child. You deserve to know that your perceptions were correct. As you begin to speak your truths, I would like you to carry the following truths in your heart. It was not your fault. You were not bad. You need to break the silence. You must not do this alone. So many times I've heard, just teach me how to live my life differently, but don't make me talk about my feelings. And in that is the plea, I just don't want to have to feel. I don't want to have to walk back through the pain. Let me say, you do need to walk back through the pain. You need to acknowledge the losses and feel the feelings. But you never again have to walk through that pain as a child. And you never again have to walk through that pain alone. There are people who are willing to take your hand and walk with you. As you begin to speak your truth, you will quickly come into contact with a variety of feelings. We need to speak to our fears and our sadnesses, our angers, our guilts. We need to speak to the present day feelings, and we must go back and own those feelings that we experienced in our growing up years. Grief work is speaking our emotional truth. We speak to the feelings that we had around what occurred, the actual abuse, the betrayal, the loss of innocence, and the pain that occurred from what did not take place as much as what did take place, such as not being protected, not being believed, and not being valued. This takes time. It's not something that somebody does in some one group, in one meeting, or just a few weeks of therapy. For most people, we're talking about doing our grief work in several months, and for some taking up to a couple of years. Now that may sound like a long time, but I want you to know that your life doesn't have to go on hold. If you're working with someone, they will help you to pace yourself so that you can live your life as you do this deep level of work. As you begin to speak, carry the following truths in your heart. Feelings are from your heart and what your heart wants to tell you. Feelings are to be listened to. They are cues and signals that indicate where you are and what it is that you need. It's healthy and necessary for survivors to grieve for the losses in their childhood. There was so much fear, humiliation, hurt, confusion, betrayal. But ultimately, you must address your anger and your rage. Anger is the feeling that I think that survivors either work the hardest to avoid or it becomes the most distorted for them. Survivors are either totally detached from or extremely frightened of or absolutely overwhelmed by this particular feeling. It's understandable that the survivor would feel tremendous power in his or her rage and be fearful of that power. Adult survivors often equate abuse with that power because that was the childhood experience. That does not have to be true today. You need to hear that you need not be hurtful with your anger or your rage. There are many ways to open up to all of your feelings without harm to yourself or to another person. And when you do, you will experience a freeing of your pain that allows you to create a healthy framework for expressing your internal power. Now, if you don't feel your anger, I want you to ask yourself, where did it go? Where did it go? Why isn't it safe? And be open to the fact that it is there, it just isn't very visible this particular time. When you're not able to focus anger at the abuser, you tend to take the anger elsewhere. And it can show up in an addiction or in compulsive behavior, such as workaholism, perfectionism, eating disorders, critical self-talk, chronic illness, or self-mutilation. It may show up as depression. You deserve to not be rageful with yourself. This rage turned inward is really personal violence. It is okay to be angry. It is not okay to be violent with oneself or with others. Don, who was both physically and sexually abused, speaks to his anger work and the need to do it. He said, I needed to scream. I needed to scream and I needed to hit. I'd felt like I had been so dead all of my life. I had to grieve for the childhood that I never had, and I could only begin with my anger. I always thought that if I got in touch with my rage, I'd end up just like my dad. And it made me so frightened of my anger that I've stayed a victim most of my life. By getting in touch with my rage, I've been able to let go of so much pain. And I also found out that I'm not just like my dad. I don't have to hurt myself or anybody else when I'm angry. Before, I couldn't get past the rage to even access any of my other feelings. Letting go of the rage has made it possible for me to get in touch with all of my feelings. It has allowed me to get to know the real me. The anger or rage work survivors need to do is not only about the perpetrator, it's with the other parent for not protecting them. Amy talks about her anger with so many people. Amy was chronically sexually abused by her grandfather as her parents frequently left her in his care as they were out drinking. She said, the resentment and the anger that I had about my grandfather haunted me everywhere in my life, in my relationships with every male, from my husband to my sons, to co-workers. I hated what he did to me and how that made me feel. And I hated my parents for not protecting me. They abandoned me. They weren't there for me. And I say that I was abandoned, but I'm not sure that I was ever claimed in the first place. And I have a whole lot of anger about that. Directing our rage toward the abuser and those who didn't protect us is pivotal to recovery. It doesn't have to be directed literally towards somebody. That rage work is often done symbolically. But again, it is my experience that for greater healing, that anger and rage usually needs to be released physically. Anger work needs to be done with somebody who is trained in very specific techniques. They may have you hit inanimate objects such as a couch or the ground with a bataka or a tennis racket. They may have you throw objects into a safe place, tearing the ripping of newspapers apart, or through the use of Gestalt or psychodrama therapy. That can be very helpful. With physical release, it also becomes helpful, though, to be able to attach words to those feelings. I'm angry at you for. It wasn't fair that. I was only a kid. Again, this is most healing when you do this with a therapist who's going to be able to assure you physical safety. Years ago, I was working in a residential treatment center for adolescent girls, and I was working with a girl whose name is, we'll say, Roxy. She was 16. When Roxy was 8 years of age, her mother began to bring men home, and Roxy was to go to bed with these men. Roxy was being prostituted out to these men by Mom. Roxy would do that for the next 4 years. Roxy, in hindsight, said that she didn't know that other little girls didn't do that. She just did what she was told. What she did come in time to realize is that when she did that, there must have been money because now there was food around the house. Around the age of 11 and 12, Roxy, she said she never liked it, never ever liked it, but she began to think that maybe in fact this isn't what all the other little girls were doing. So one night when Mom brought a man home, Roxy in the meantime had become diabetic. One night in particular, Roxy said, no, I'm not going to do it. And Mom and the man threatened to take her insulin away. Roxy said, no, I'm not going to do it. And they threatened to take her insulin away. Roxy said no. Roxy ended up in a hospital in a diabetic coma. When she came out of the coma, she told the physician what it was that had been going on for years. Well, I was working with Roxy 4 years later. Roxy had never returned home. I was now working with her in a residential treatment setting. I was working an all-night shift this night, and I heard a noise down the hall, and I peeked down, and I saw the light on in Roxy's room. And I headed down the hallway and I peeked in her room, and there she is sitting on the bed, a little Raggedy Ann doll in one hand and a big Raggedy Ann doll in the other hand. And she's taken this little Raggedy Ann doll and just beating, just clobbering that big Raggedy Ann doll. And I opened up the door and I said, "Who is it, Roxy?" She said, "The little one." She says, "That's me." And the big one, "That's my mom." Roxy had broken the silence at 12 years of age. She'd spoken the truth. She was now reclaiming her power. She was now freeing herself from the past. You'll find as rage is released, it becomes easier to identify other feelings. Rage has been the holding tank for so many other feelings, our fears, our sadnesses, and so much other pain. It's important to take a moment, though, here most likely, I think, to recognize the male and female differences, particularly as they relate to expressing feelings. It has been less acceptable culturally for men to show any feeling but anger. Very early on, male and female children are given messages that are very specific to their gender about what feelings are appropriate for them to express. Children learn that it's okay for girls to cry, as they are viewed as the weaker sex. However, boys are told that they cannot cry. They may assert their anger. They're told that aside from anger, feelings are not okay. Feelings represent being weak, and that represents as well being feminine. Because of these cultural messages, male incest survivors spend a great amount of time trying to think their way out of feelings versus to be with those feelings. While male survivors have as much to be enraged about as females, it's most important that their rage not be a reenactment of the one feeling that men are allowed, anger. In an attempt to counteract feelings of vulnerability and impaired masculinity, adult male survivors can end up feeling that their only protection lies in intimidating the world with some theatrical display of their anger. Anger work is not about intimidation or having to protect or shield one's own vulnerability. Anger work is a form of indignation over the injustices that you have suffered. As you begin to speak your truths, carry the following in your heart. One needs to walk through the pain, not over it, not around it. The good news, you never again have to walk through that pain alone. And today, as you respond with the vulnerability of your child, you also carry with you the strength of your adult. Getting in touch with our inner child is vital to our healing process. For many survivors, the concept of an inner child is very threatening. Even acknowledging the fact that you were a child can be threatening. It means remembering a time when you didn't have the power to protect yourself. It means remembering your vulnerability. It means acknowledging that the abuse really did happen to you. As an adult, it's very easy to do unto yourself that which was once done to you. Survivors oftentimes hate themselves for having been small, for having needed affection, for having in their own minds let themselves have been hurt. When you dislike, ignore, reject, hate yourself, in essence reject that child within, you're hating a part of who you are. And it's in taking care of that inner child that you will take care of yourself. Picture the inner child with three different parts. First, the natural child. This is the creative, expressive aspect of the inner child. It's our emotional responsiveness. It's our spiritual self. I think it's the part of us that dances with life. It's the part that attends to our feelings and indicates what it is that we need. Well, when someone is sexually abused as a child, they're not being valued as a person. They're being treated as an object. And in that process, your humanness, your spirit, was ignored and assaulted. We learned it wasn't safe to just be. We learned early on to protect ourselves from the pain of rejection. We buried this innocent child, and we built a false protective shell around to protect us from any further hurt. That natural inner child becomes a prisoner, and a hurting inner child emerges. The hurting inner child is the part of us who carries the anger, the rage, the hurt, and the fear that was experienced. We can only take so much pain, so in order to survive, another part of our inner child emerges. The controlling child comes into the picture to care, to take care, to rescue. The controlling child takes over, comes in to protect the hurting inner child and the natural child. The controlling inner child is really our built-in survival system. In recovery, what happens is we uncover the buried pain of the hurting child. And much of what we often hear at first is the voice of the wounded, abandoned child. We hear the fear, the anger, the grief, the pain. You may need to spend months being willing to listen, being present to that hurt inner child in a loving way before some of that inner pain begins to melt, before some of the anger melts away, allowing that controlling child to be willing to relax, clearing the way for that natural child to emerge. It is our inner child that gives us back our spontaneity, tells us what we feel, usually knows what it is we need. He or she is what allows us to laugh, to play. We don't give up our adult side just by acknowledging our inner child. I think that it frees our adult. When we disown the child within, that leads to alienation from self and to the emptiness that we so often feel. I believe the worst abandonment of all is the abandonment of self. May you carry these truths in your heart. Listen to your inner child not with criticism, but with openness. May the child in your heart remain forever free. As a group, adult children and survivors in general are real quick to bypass anger and jump into forgiveness. This usually has more to do with one's fear of anger and a need for approval than genuine forgiveness. Before forgiveness of others is truly possible, you must own what it is that happened to you. You must acknowledge the losses, feel the feelings. I don't think that it's possible to forgive if you haven't walked through your anger and your rage. You can come to an intellectual understanding, but not truly forgive. The question so often asked is, where does forgiveness enter into this healing process? Or do I need to forgive in order to heal? You need to explore for yourself what forgiveness means to you. Now let me tell you how I see forgiveness and see if this may help you develop an answer for yourself. Let me begin by first saying what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not forgetting. We cannot forget, nor should we. Those experiences and even the pain that they caused have a great deal to teach us about not being victimized again or about not victimizing others. Forgiveness is not condoning. By forgiving the people who hurt us, we're not saying that what they did was acceptable or unimportant or wasn't so bad. It was. It hurt and it was bad. And it has made a difference in our life. Forgiveness is not absolution. They are still responsible for what they did to us. Forgiveness is not a form of self-sacrifice. It's not swallowing our true feelings and then playing martyr. Forgiveness is not never again being angry about the abuse. What happened to you was hurtful. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And for that, you may always feel anger. You have all the reason and all the right to be angry, but you want to get to the point that your anger no longer interferes with how you care about yourself and how you live your life. It's unrealistic, though, to expect that you would never again be angry about the molestation. To forgive is not a clear-cut, one-time decision. No matter how sincerely we may want to let go of the past and move on into the future with our life, we cannot just one day or at one moment blithely do it. There's a process of grief work which one must walk through that allows forgiveness to occur. Now let me speak to what I think forgiveness is. That's what it means to me. Forgiveness is recognizing that we no longer need our grudges and our resentments, our hatred and self-pity. We don't need them as an excuse for getting less out of life than what we want or deserve. We do not need them as a weapon to punish those who hurt us or to keep other people from getting close to us. Forgiveness is no longer wanting to punish the people who hurt us. It's realizing that we can truly never even the score, and it's the inner peace that comes when we stop trying to. Forgiveness is what happens naturally as a result of confronting past painful experiences and healing old wounds. Forgiveness is an internal process. It happens within. With forgiveness, we no longer build an identity around something that happened to us in the past. We realize that there is more to us than our past. The past is now put into its proper perspective. It is a part of who we are, rather than all of who we are. May you carry the following truths in your heart. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it's remembering and letting go. Surround yourself with people who respect and treat you well. The healing that I've described is the process of reclaiming your power. Reclaiming your power. You are no longer the child who was victimized. You are an adult who was once abused. You can retrieve all the power that you didn't have then, and you do that in a variety of ways. One way of reclaiming power is by establishing healthy boundaries. When you were raised with intrusiveness and abuse, it's difficult to be able to identify and establish healthy boundaries for yourself. By setting limits and establishing boundaries, you're protecting yourself. Before we can set limits, though, we must acknowledge the pain that was associated with the abuse. And once the grief work has been done, it's far easier to say, I need, I want, and I deserve. By establishing boundaries and setting limits, the survivor begins to use the words no and yes with freedom. And that also takes a lot of work. It wasn't safe to say no as a child. Without the freedom to say no, yes was said with tremendous fear and helplessness, or out of a desperate need for approval and love. Recovery means talking about the many times that you couldn't say no but wanted to, and the anger and the pain that was associated with that. Recovery means recognizing that the ability to say no offers protection. It offers you choice. You have the power and the right to say no and yes. You will find that yes is a gift that is offered freely rather than out of fear or the need for approval. Recognize that by saying no, you're actually saying yes to yourself. Saying no or yes sounds so simple, but as Mary Beth said, learning to say no was probably the most painful part of my recovery. When my therapist and I began to work on boundaries, I realized that I couldn't even say the word out loud. My whole life, I had manipulated my whole life so that I never had to say the word no. Took me weeks to say it. And then took me weeks to say it loud enough for anybody else to be able to hear it and to feel the power behind it. Today I like it. No. 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 Another way we reclaim power is by challenging the internalized messages that we took in as children. Messages such as, you're not worth anything. You're never going to amount to anything. No one's ever going to believe anything that you have to say. Can't you do a damn thing right? You need to symbolically toss those messages out, get rid of those messages, and then create new messages in their place. And you change those previous messages to messages such as, I am of value. I am important. I speak the truth. People will believe me. My perceptions are accurate. I am bright, capable, trustworthy. And we need to repeat those messages on a daily basis. You say them over and over and over until you feel them in your heart and ultimately come to believe them. Now, obviously, many feelings will arise as you do this. It's all a part of that grief process. These are feelings that need to be identified, acknowledged. Be patient with yourself, but be persistent. As children from troubled families, so many of our rights were neglected and are taken away. It's important to go back and reclaim that which was rightfully ours in childhood. It's important that the following rights be integrated into your hearts and minds. You have the right to choose who can and cannot touch you. You have the right to distinguish how you are touched. You have the right to determine what type of touch is acceptable to you. And you have the right to say no. This is such an important journey, a powerful journey. But you're an incredible person, a powerful person. And it's my hope that you will come to find your internal strength, your specialness, and your dignity. Thank you.